Hey everyone! I've been putting up episodes less frequently, but I'm hoping to change that. I just turned in the manuscript for my next book, which took over a bunch of my time, but I'm planning for some great conversations coming up over the next months, so stay tuned. This is a special episode. I got to talk with two beautiful thinkers, doers, friends, Josh Rivers and Conner Habib. Josh makes the podcast Busy Being Black, where he hosts deep, heartfelt discussions with Black artists, writers, and philosophers. I love Josh's openness in his approach, the way he forges connections with his conversation partners, and how he brings so many strands of ideas and practices together. Conner makes Against Everyone with Conner Habib, where he also hosts discussions with thinkers, writers, and artists, talking about political, spiritual, and creative questions. Conner digs deep into the material and always has so much wisdom to offer. With both of them, I come out of listening with so many ideas and full of inspiration. If you listen to The Breakup Theory, you may already be familiar with Conner, since we have recorded multiple times together, one episode, for example, with Dean Spade. But if you haven't checked out Josh's or Conner's work, you are about to find a huge catalog of important topics and amazing people in conversation. Go do it now. I'm linking everything in the show notes. Josh and Conner are honestly two of my favorite people to talk with. My favorite approach to thinking is in dialogue with others, not following any specific plan, but moving associatively through the meetings of our thoughts, references, and questions. I love going into something not knowing how I'll come out of it, welcoming in discovery that fires me up and sets me on new paths. Both Josh and Conner are the kind of people who also thrive on this approach. This is what we do in the following conversation. It was sparked by a series Conner made on his podcast called A New Spiritual Society, inspired by one of Conner's spiritual teachers, Rudolf Steiner's idea of fourfolding. Conner follows this framework to plumb the depths of the spiritual heart of culture, politics, and the economy. You don't have to listen to this series to understand our discussion, but I highly recommend that you do. Conner specifically gears his thinking to our current situation and provides insight into how we might reframe the way we do things and the way we're situated in the world. The series is really a feat of the imagination and also very helpful. Josh and I came in to follow the thread of the spiritual heart, bringing in our own current projects and thinking and whatever we're connecting with. All of us have different passions, with some that overlap, and this makes for a wide-ranging conversation. At the end, Josh prompts us each to ask a question of the other two, which kind of works to sum up the lines of the thoughts we follow. Josh asks, how do you care for what you love? Conner asks, if you let go of the set of capitalism versus communism or socialism, what's left in your view of how to change the world? And I ask, how do you open things up so that you have a new and altered view? And then at the end, Josh invites us to dance. Maybe you'll find yourself dancing. I love this conversation and I'm still energized by it, still thinking about it, so I hope that you find it inspiring too. I'm not going to go on longer because this is a substantial talk, but let me know what you think. Before we get into the conversation, I'll do my usual rundown of ways you can support this project. If you like the podcast, please rate and follow it on the different apps or wherever you listen to it. That does help boost the potential audience. Also tell your friends. I love hearing from people about their thoughts, but as always, any questions you might want us to tackle on the show, you can leave us a message at 917-426-6548 or use the forum forum.jotform.com/thebreakuptheory/stories. Or just find me on Instagram at thebreakuptheory and DM me. If you want access to more of my work, as well as the work of wonderful Carla Joy Bergman, Danny Burleson, and Vicky Osterweil, sign up for our newsletter at cawshinythings.com. If you subscribe, you'll also get access to all of our articles, our Discord server where we have discussion, movie nights, writing workshops, and book clubs, and more. Our podcasts, advice column, and zine and sticker library are always free. I'm proud of this thing that we're building together. We're trying to create a support system for the lonely, impoverished work of writing, but also for the people who come looking for things in the CAW community, and we have all these amazing conversations. It's a way to engage in new ways to collective thinking and writing. If you want to reach any of us there, you can email caw.shinythings@proton.me. The Breakup Theory is a member of the Channel Zero network of anarchist podcasts, which pulls together a wide variety of shows, taking an anarchist perspective on culture, politics, actions, and more. Check them out at channelzeronetwork.com. Okay, so I'm very excited. This is a special occasion to be talking both with Josh Rivers, who does the Busy Being Black podcast, and Conner Habib, who does Against Everyone with Conner Habib. We were brought together because Conner had started or completed a series of episodes for his podcast on a new spiritual society, with the episodes focusing on culture, politics, and economy. And this was bringing us into conversation to kind of imagine ways that we can reframe the world away from the tools that are given us towards the ways that we would like to see. And so I think really what we want to dig into in this conversation is like other sources, tapping into other places than we are normally drawing from in our interactions and recreations of the world. So I'll just maybe throw it to Conner if you want to elaborate any more on what I was saying and presenting where you're at, and then we can move from there, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So thanks. And just so everyone knows, this is the first time I'm talking with Josh ever. One of the amazing things about doing a podcast as sort of beleaguered and dismissed as they often are, is that you meet people for the first time in real conversation. And that's really exciting. That's really exciting to me. And Julie, of course, I want to talk with you every day of my life. So that's all fine. And I think one of the things that makes me so excited is that we all have very different sort of backgrounds and interests, but I think we are all kind of interested in taking up this project of revitalizing the world, or just vitalizing it newly, and renewing aspects of it without just sort of reaching for the kind of dull, sometimes hopeful, but otherwise often very dull tools that are just given to us over and over and over again, with some sort of hope that they'll now spontaneously work for us. And so the series I did that you referred to, A New Spiritual Society, is based on, my spiritual perspective broadly as someone who's into Western esotericism and particularly esoteric Christianity, but sort of zeroing in on the work of late 19th, early 20th century philosopher, scientist, occultist Rudolf Steiner, who has sort of mixed reputation in leftist spaces for sure. Hopefully there's kind of a leftist reading biography coming out, 2 volumes from State University of New York Press by Aaron French and Henry Holland, might clear some of the issues up with that. The idea was, how do I look into the social organism, society, in its organs almost? How do I strengthen the health of each of the systems here? Culture, politics, and economy. And how do I do that? By looking at what is really there. I understand now that there's this new way of looking at the world that's gathering. And I don't really exactly know what it is yet, but I could feel it when I did these episodes. Because here I was speaking about the spiritual heart of culture. And I found myself reaching for, yes, these esotericists, but also Susan Sontag. Or I was speaking about the spiritual heart of politics. And yes, again, I was talking about Krishnamurti, but also then finding myself in the same company as Kathy Weeks, the great anti-work feminist, or in the economics realm, finding this economist, Albert Hirschman, and then also, drawing on Michael Hart and Antonio Negri and Empire, Assembly, Multitude, Commonwealth, right next to this Bulgarian occultist. And so all these ideas started swirling together in ways that I knew were not being combinated before. And then I started hearing from others that they were doing this too, that these influences, these connections, these new meetings were happening in their own work. And so that's, to go all the way back to what I said right in the beginning, one of the things that's really exciting about this podcast is it's actually modeling that in a way right here and now, this new congregation to approach the world and revitalize it.
I love new congregation, the spiritual heart of society. I mean, these are all phrases that pertain to my particular beat and my particular perspective, which is understanding poetic and imaginative vigor, particularly as it shows up within queer Black communities, across space and time, across different artistic disciplines and movements for liberation and equality. We see this really profound and fecund imagination among the super marginalized, among the forgotten, among those who thrive in liminal spaces. And I think there's something, not to kind of farm from these oppressions, but there is something that we do when we're together. And we see this, it's so obvious, it's so luminous. There's something that we do together that not only models a way of living and inhabiting life together, um, but that helps us think more imaginatively about what we want from the world. Like I've been reading Mark Fisher recently, and this understanding that of just how limited and denuded our imaginations have been. I think we can't even underestimate that. And this whole thing started for me maybe in 2022. I was reading Black Trans Feminism by Marquise Bay, because they were coming on to Busy Being Black for a conversation. And I was coincidentally at the same time reading the work of Walter Brueggemann, his book, The Prophetic Imagination from 1978. And one of Walter Brueggemann's key offerings within that text is that poets are prophets, right? The prophet is here to criticize the power structures and awaken us to what's possible, right? The imagination of Solomon is a limited imagination. It's an imagination that suits the king, not the people. And I kept thinking about the poetry of Essex Hemphill and Melvin Dixon and the filmmaking of Marlon Riggs and Isaac Julian. And I was like, each of these people, and that's just a handful of them, have awakened me to myself, to my spirit, to my inheritance. They offer a trenchant critique through poetic form, through beauty, through intimacy, through eroticism that I think we rarely see. And I thought, these are the prophets, right? These are the people that I want to be calling in to support me as I think about how to help shape a world that is more tender and relationally intimate and maybe a little bit slower. I've described Busy Being Black for a long time, inspired by the great Padre Gotuma, as a soft place to land, right? I want people to feel well held, well loved, well cared for in this space. So I'm so thrilled, Connor. The first time I listened to Against Everyone with Conner Habib, I sent you a video of me crying in Morrison's in the grocery store. I couldn't believe it. I was like, this is my kin. And that, the soul is contained within the voice, right? And so to both of you, I'm so grateful for the way you've offered your voice to the world and helped me feel less alone. And you both have inspired me in ways that will go on to inspire others. And so I'm really, really grateful to be here.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, yeah, speaking with both of you over the last few years since we've started talking has been, I mean, it's such a, you were talking about like vitalizing, Connor, and it's such a vitalizing experience of having interlocutors like you two, where like you can just go into different places. And as we're going into this recording, sort of like we all like to just go for it, not like we're not going from a script. And I don't know, I think it is one of my greatest pleasures in life to be able to bounce with other people through these ideas in an unstructured fashion. So yes, this is like the new congregation right now in a way.
I just had an idea. Maybe I can open with a poem that I wrote just this morning.
Yes,
It just occurred to
by
me.
all
Why
means, I would
not,
love
right?
that.
Okay. The other day, I'm thinking a lot about less social media, and this is not innovative or new. I'm just letting you know. I'm chronically online. I'm experimenting with the idea of being less chronically online. And yesterday, I was taking a walk and listening to one of the lectures from Harvard Divinity School, which we'll get into probably. And I was really paying close attention to my surroundings as I was listening. And I came across this kind of shrub full of these daisies, and I saw like one blue flower. And this morning I woke up and I wrote this poem. You have permission to be blue, to ignore the cloying crooning of whiteness at your crown and stem. You have permission to be blue, to grow, determined and defiant, among weeds and daisies, all the more blue to refuse to want to become honey, or persimmon or pruned, neither sunflower nor lavender, nor any less blue. Look at you, electric you, brilliant and blue, bold and blue, you and blue and blue and bent, and blue with caterpillar-carved petals, a monument to the hustle and honor and delicious delight of blooming blue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just as a reaction that also to tap into what the both of you have been saying. I love that the permission to be blue that is also connected with a refusal to, take on other expectations or conform. I think I'm really interested in refusals and the positivity of refusals. But one thing I was thinking in terms of both of your approaches, and I think, I don't know, maybe this is something that's overlooked, but when we have writers or poets, whoever they're presenting their understanding of the world, and sometimes we take it as if that's the truth, right? And that we would need to, understand it fully and understand it on their terms in order to incorporate it. But I always think about this in terms of we are each like this place of holding together all of these sources. And in our individuality, there's like a unique way that we combine them that we can then share to the world. And it's never going to be, it's all misreadings, right? Of whatever we receive, that then we combine to do something else, and then hopefully it continues to go on. I mean, that's how I think about my work. It's like in conversation, and it's whatever I'm making of whatever I'm receiving at that time in that moment. And so yeah, we can connect the random, like, oh, I was reading this like spiritual person and this economics professor or whatever at the same time. And but then there is also this feeling, and maybe this connects to the esotericism part too, that there is, you were talking about this, I feel like in the economics episode, Connor, about there's like a kind of a source, like this kind of, that is energy that gets put into different places that we could move together, or we can get, locked into certain places, um, and stuck, right? And I think that, I don't know, I'm interested in that kind of like individuality and commonality, but but yeah, that permission to be, it's like just so beautiful. I don't, yeah, it's you. Tell me if you are picking up anything from what I'm saying.
I just want to say it's so exciting to hear the poem and then to hear Shuli, you say what you're saying, right? Like these unlikely meetings, to hear that response after Josh read the poem, because people would hear the poem and they'd be like, oh my gosh, I love those flowers, or they'd have the image or whatever, and maybe they don't have anyone to talk to. But then to have the poem read out in this conversation, and I know that maybe that sounds like kind of trite in a way, but I don't mean it that way. I mean, like, this is very unlikely. And this is actually the nature of the economy in that episode, why I'm calling the wellspring. And the wellspring, instead of the commonwealth, which is what Hart and Negri call it, meaning that there's this kind of massive availability of knowledges, of strategies, of tactics, but also creativities available to us. And that actually is the real form of economy. So when we talk about the economy, we're talking about how it's the all. Culture is the individual. Politics is the two or more in this way that I'm talking about it. And economy is the everybody, all of them. And so this is this sort of wellspring that's available to all of us all the time. One thing I was drawing on to think about that, which relates to what you're saying, is the work of my main mentor in life, in my academic life, which was Lynn Margulies, the geoscientist and microbiologist who developed the Gaia theory with James Lovelock, and she knew more about bacteria than anybody in the world. But she would talk about how bacteria exchange their genes laterally, meaning the way she described it is like, it's not like you pass it from ancestor to ancestor. It's as if you get in a hot tub with, you have blonde hair and you get into a hot tub with someone who has brown hair and a dog, and you come out with floppy ears and, brown hair on your arms. Like, it all sort of happens in this way where all the information, the bits, the traits are being exchanged all the time between all of us. And that for me is a real picture of what the economy actually is, this free, surprising place of comedy that we can dip in and out of whenever we want. When you said blue, when you brought up a blue flower, something esotericism does is it creates kind of side economy of, in a way, like a alternative economy of correspondences. So when I think blue, I think of the Archangel Gabriel, whose corresponding color is blue, and who announced the Quran. So this symbiosis, this mutual connection happens there too. So just to say, like, even in this tiny moment, all the flows and breaks that are available to us in just like 2 minutes of conversation is it. Imagine how, if we spoke this way with each other, which is taking an interest in each other rather than doing the right or wrong thing, which is like a recapitulation of original sin anyway. We have to be right all the time. But so we took an interest in one another, we can start actually feeling the kind of vibe or pulse of the actual wellspring that is the spiritual economy of knowledges that's available to us all the time.
You're right. It is unlikely that to have this experience, and it's beautiful to be able to share a poem that just came out, and I'm sure I'll make edits to it later, but to feel encouraged to share what lights me up with others who receive it in that way. But also blue is grief, right? And it's associated with sadness. And sadness, as we know etymologically, used to mean actually the opposite of what it means now, right? It used to have this meaning that this kind of deep longing for something, or this deep excitement about something. Um, and so if I hadn't told you the poem was about flowers, what else might it have been, right? And there's the association with blue and the depths and lapis lazuli, and the lapis wanted to come through, and I was like, no, because everyone knows who you are already. And but this, when we think about the economy too, I just scribbled down choice, because so much of our understanding of economics is about this kind of capital big E economics. You've got people on the news talking in numbers and percentages and systems and things that are intentionally confusing and intentionally meant to make economics seem beyond the average quotidian decision. But actually, economics comes down to the individual choices we make every day. And the only thing that the only power that any of us really retain is our power of choice. And this is a spiritual understanding, right? That in any given moment, we get to choose which plane, which timeline, which what have you, we want to be on. And so if we can remember that the spiritual practice of coming back to ourselves, the contemplative practice of sitting quietly and understanding that we are one is all, what have you, is also this reminder that we have these choices, we have this power available to us every day that helps us form these new economies. To the point around Lynn Margulies, I'm really enchanted by the work of Andreas Weber, the biological philosopher, who defines erotic as this drive, this compulsion to touch and be transformed. And central to his theory and his philosophy is that our smallest cells are driven by the erotic, by this desire to touch and be transformed, and that we can understand ecology and economies both as these erotic relationships that propel us forward. And this image of the hot tub is actually really evocative for me, because it makes me think of the 70s and like this time period that I long for so much that I never got to experience. But this idea also that this is also how sexuality ought to work, right? That I ought to be able to get into a hot tub with a stranger and come out of that hot tub transformed by the encounter. But that actually in these moments of potential intimacy, we actually have too much armor on to allow ourselves to be touched, to allow ourselves to spill over. And this links actually to the current time that we're in, whereby this conversation we want to be having across art form, across scholarly discipline, across perspective, is sometimes so stunted by a fear that my critique of your work is negative instead of what it often is, which is a deep engagement with your way of seeing the world and a desire to offer something so that we might meet each other in some new place. And, the other day I read this article by Anastasia Prosina called Space Wommism, and it really fired me up. Like, it sent me in quite a tailspin. I thought there was a lot missing from within this. But she's been earwigging in my head in the days since. And I'm thinking, maybe I'm being too small minded. Maybe she has something to show me that I haven't quite seen yet. And I love this too. Because I bring that up because I put out a reel about it. And I was like, oh, she's going to think I'm criticizing her work negatively. But actually, I actually want to have a conversation about its limitations and therefore its potential. So yeah, that's what this brings up for me.
Oh my God, this all just gelled for me though. Okay, so this is really weird. I got a text from a friend who I've done conversations with, Simon von Sarlos, before about trans despair. And they were like, do you know Emma Biget? And I was like, I feel like that's familiar. She wrote a book on like eco-trans feminisms. It hasn't been translated in French. And then listening to you talk about Lynn Margulies, and then Josh, you were talking about the like eco sexuality. I put it all together that I'd read an essay by Emma Biget where she cites Margulies, and it's called "On Sex and Symbiosis," and she's talking about the hypersexuality of like bacteria, and using it also to think about how we talk about queerness or transness, like this idea of trying to locate it into a gene or something, like how we explain it, but rather to think about it as this kind of proliferation. I haven't reread it in a minute, so I'm kind of going off my 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 version of it. But I think sort of like also thinking about like, queer people not failing to reproduce, but that reproduction happens in all of these, it's like constantly happening beyond our individuality into down to the cellular level. Um, so that was just a weird like coming
But
together moment for me.
but that's but that's amazing. The word proliferation, I think, is so potent because so much of the normalizing thrust of the gay rights movement, and I say that as distinct from queer rights, has been to make us palatable to this cis heteronormative patriarchal system. And that defanging of our queerness, like our ability to seep and spill and to be anarchic and to proliferate and to mesh and mold, to be messy together. That's part of what we're missing, right? Is that I want to become undone. I actually, for those astrology girlies listening, my rising sign is Virgo. So me becoming undone, I have a Capricorn moon as well, the nearly fucking impossible. And it doesn't help that everyone around me is also trying to be so composed. So this invitation to proliferate, to let the gates down, or rather raise the gates, let the bridge down, is so exciting to me. It really gets my imagination fired up.
Yeah, and I think to both of those points, it's like the that proliferation is already happening. I mean, it's already happening all the time anyway, right? So like thinking about how we try to block up that what Walter Benjamin and then Adorno would call a porosity, that actually there's like this breathing in and out of the landscapes that we walk through that's always happening, where things are always spilling in and out of each other. So it's interesting to think about how we limit that and why, right? And this is actually also a psychoanalytical and Freudian question, which obviously Julie's very interested in this realm, but it's, um, the erotic is always on in psychoanalysis, except maybe when you're in psychoanalysis talking about sex, then that's the only time it's on. But
You're
like,
always you're seducing the analyst.
yeah, 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 exactly. But every other time it's always on, and so in a way, like the world we walk through is erotic. We just need, or sexual, actually. We just need a different kind of understanding of what that means. And for to call the non-reproductive sex act is actually much more common sex act, right? Most sex is not reproductive. And so to privilege the reproductive sexual act as what sex is that's a misnomer. That's actually not that's a very rare form of sex. And so then I also like just pulling back and saying, well, there's even all these other kinds of like the intercourses happening all the time. And the world is in fact erotic. And so how do we decide to look and when? We can begin to look at why we limit reception in certain places, where our boundaries are. When we're talking about the economy and we're talking about, say, ultra wealthy people, for instance, we don't, I think by and large, I'm sure some people listening to the show would take aim at this and say, no, I'm wrong. But I don't think we dislike them or have a problem with them because they're ultra wealthy. It's because they actually block up everyone else's porosity. They actually block other people's access to the infinite wellspring that should be available to all of us. Instead of opening it up more and more with this thing that's happening in their incarnation, which is having all this access to all this money, they become like smog, like sitting on the pile of gold and no one can enter the cave. And so I think it's this idea of how do we do that also? Where do we block up the pores? Where do we hoard something? Where do we? And I'm not saying that's always wrong. Those are, to me, also economic questions. And just one last thing here, which is like, again, looking at how much has come up from three people when two or more gather, right? But when three or more gather, it's even more exciting. It's three people speaking, and how much becomes available instantly from these different individualities and incarnations speaking. Imagine how much is possible when people actually really decide to talk. And that, to me, is what the economy actually is. There's so much completely available to us at all times. And I mean, I think in practical anarchism, actually, Shuli, you go really like a good distance expressing the absolute possibility of coming together. It's not just coming together organized. As soon as you come together, like the true form of things is revealed in that all these overlapping metaphors and all these combinations, all these intercourses and sexual and erotic acts and, new possibilities and ideas. And just the enthusiasm, I'm feeling it right now. It's elating.
Well, I've got two questions. The first is, what's the difference then between ecology and economy? And two, does this generosity that which I consider it, this generosity towards the ultra wealthy, that we don't dislike them, we dislike them blocking our access to things. Does that perspective actually contain within it the limit of the imagination? Because if we're thinking about beyond what we currently have, this generosity towards the ultra wealthy as, I don't know, this kindness towards them, is that a kindness actually prescribed, right? Like this is what's expected, that we can continually offer this rehumanizing grace towards the ultra wealthy within this system that is going to quote Audre Lorde, grind us to dust.
I feel all of this is bringing me towards some of my the people that I go to a lot. But I was going to say some of this association from an anarchist perspective is affinity can bring us together, where we, rather than I don't know, I always go back to this June Jordan thing, we can't connect through the what's oppressing us, but we have to find something else to connect with each other. But okay, so ecology and economy, I've been going into Bataille, Georges Bataille in my head, the French philosopher, pornographer. And I've always attached to his idea of the general economy, which is something that's beyond what we understand as the economy in terms of, the money, right? The organization of money and jobs and stuff like that. And for him, it includes waste. This is the most important thing, is that the idea of an economy as a kind of scientific structure is one that should be self-sufficient to a certain extent, which is always a lie. And we even have that image of our bodies, we want to desire to be self-sufficient, but obviously we shit and throw up and and which is also all a matter of taste too, I think, right? What we want to associate with. so for him, waste is important. And the image that I always go to from the essay, The Solar Anus, is like the sun. The sun is just like pouring energy out all the time, right? It doesn't matter where, um, like it's not giving it to us in particular. We don't choose to receive it or not, right? And in that kind of continual giving is this like, I always think of the word lurid, like the plant life, right? That just like rises from the ground, like your flower, right? You see this bush, and it's sexual. It's like everything is throbbing, right? Like it's spring right now, and it's just like there's fucking sperm everywhere, everywhere. I'm like breathing it into it's stuck in my throat, like everything. When I see the lushness of life, it's just like it's almost like lurid. Now, the other thing that came into my mind, though, that makes it maybe a question of how we act in the world. I've studied Emmanuel Levinas, who is a philosopher of ethics, kind of Lithuanian, I think, Jew, has some Zionist problems, but he talks about like he has this impossible ethics that basically like it's like it's thinking about how the other is like comes before the self. I'm really just like breaking it down quickly, and it doesn't really matter. The thing that I think is really important that I'm trying to pull from him is this idea that like every breath we take is taking breath from something else at that moment. Like it's not, but I don't think of that as scarcity, right? Like that we're limited. It's just to imagine the way that we're inhabiting in this world is something is in relation to another, and that our life depends on the other. And so how do we think about engaging with other people when we know that our breath is taking from another breath? That I think is maybe getting towards the idea of porosity too. As just a kind of connection, but thinking about it from an ethical point of view, I think that's interesting because I don't know, it can create a sort of, I don't know if sympathy is the right word. The way that it strikes me in my world is that I get stuck looking at people's faces. And in one point in my head, I have Thomas de Quincey, Confessions of the English Opium Eater, when he's like totally fucked up on opium, having the horror of the human face, like wandering around London. And then but I look at faces and I think about the vulnerability of like having a face, of showing up every day, having a face, and how your life becomes that face. And like what happens first? Is your face determine I don't know. Anyway, I like get really moved by just staring on the subway at like someone's face and thinking about the life within them. I've kind of veered off whatever the hell I was trying to talk about now.
I have something to pick up from like what you were saying, and I'll leave aside for at least now the ecology economy question, and talk about Levinas and faces for a minute in response also to Joshua's question. One, that vulnerability of faces. One of the interesting things is queer people is that we know the risk of staring at someone's face out of desire, right? So it's our vulnerability, not just as having one, but at looking at the other person's face, and that tension of, will they want to fuck or kill me or a little bit of both? And how's that entangled in them? And all that kind of stuff, that tension of the vulnerability of not just being looked at, but looking at others. One of the interesting things in regarding the other or being regarded by others, the proposition is that we are composed of both, but there's an aspect of ourselves, like a massive aspect, comprised of collection of others gazing upon us in a way. And I can never see my own face, ever. I'm looking at on the Zoom screen now, but talk about ecology. That's an ecology of digital quantities and light, and also the oblivion of space, which those things are encountering before they come back down to each of our devices here. When I went to Vietnam, I was sitting in the hotel room and there was a gecko crawling up the wall. And I looked at the gecko and it kind of tilted its head at me. And then all of a sudden, I had this moment, which a lot of Buddhists describe as a spiritual like a moment in spiritual development, as well as other traditions, where suddenly I was looking at me from the gecko. And then it expanded beyond the get-go to I felt me as the chair underneath me, the floor beneath my feet, the air around me. I was everything that I was not, composing the negative void that was me sitting there. This also actually kind of gels with psychoanalysis in a few ways, which is interesting. But I was being composed by everything that was around me. So when I think about the ultra wealthy and the kindness that we grant them or whatever, in some ways, I'm just sort of thinking like, this is reality. We've composed them as well. And not only we have composed them, there are many forces which compose them. And so as we regard them, it's not about a sort of ceding ground to their behavior, but rather taking on the world that we share. And how do we then look at them and how do we consider what they're doing as wrong? Where would where would we need to sort of open up? How would we need to sort of consider that? And not to take that on as blame, but actually to take that on as a shared project, bearing a pall together as well, like sharing death processes together and all that.
Well, again, I think this is why understanding economy as an ecology might be helpful, because economies aren't necessarily as it's been imagined on our behalf. Is not about relationships, but about transactions. Ecologies and ecosystems are about relationships between things. The inhale as a taking and the exhale as a giving back, right? That kind of cyclical, always on erotic engagement. I'm going to take this opportunity to bring in Essex Hemphill, because I think this is from Vital Signs, his poem, and I think it speaks to both the faces and the economies and ecologies that we're still grappling with 40 years later. At the bathhouse, the thin white towel loosely tied around his dark waist barely conceals the excitement I anticipate. He stands before me, lean, unshielded warrior. I drop my thin white towel to the floor so he can see I am also not afraid. The two black beauties sculpted the length of my white sheeted bed are so still in the moonlight spilling through tall windows, lingering over them, curious about their peace. Hard to imagine them anywhere else, for anyone's eyes other than my own. Hard to imagine any other blessing I care about more at this moment. Yeah.
That speaks to me so much. I had this moment in my life back when I was making porn movies and the DVD era. It's a long time ago now. There was this guy that I had a crush on at the gym. Actually, he was my trainer at the time. And I was so into him. And I was in the locker room and he came in and I was naked and I like pulled the towel up around myself. And then I thought, because I was so like embarrassed, and I was like, wait, he can see me in any scene he wants. Like I've done, like he's probably seen me naked. Like now everyone can see, right? And so this brings me to this like idea that is a very tricky one to navigate, but I'd love to try to do it, right? Which is like the idea of treating the body as private property, the idea of treating how we look at each other and how we feel as quote unquote private rather than public, and how that echoes out and what that does to us. Now, obviously, you can live on public land, and if someone like bursts into your house in the middle of the night without calling you, it's going to feel violating. So I want to just be very careful and say I'm not talking about the violation of the body here, but I wanted to talk about it in terms of when we're talking about ecologies and economies and what belongs to us and what belongs to everybody. And this poem and that experience I had are opening up this sort of differing space of, do I belong to me? Do I belong to others? Actually, both. And do we belong to each other? And what does that mean when it's beyond a notion of privacy and property? And what does that tell us about the economy? It's funny, we're really focusing on economy questions rather than political or cultural ones, which I know, Shuli, you want to get into the political ones. So I don't want to hold us back in economy, but that's what I think of immediately when you read this poem.
But that is a political poem, right? It's called Vital Signs. And, this poem is written during the height of the AIDS crisis, which we should name, Jafari S. Allen calls the long 1980s, because they're still going on. And so this idea that the political and the cultural is separate from the economic is a myth, right? Like the economies that are playing out in that poem, the price of the bathhouse, who is in charge of cleaning that bathhouse. Later in the poem, he's talking about the Black man that he's attracted to choosing the blonde-haired, blue-eyed man who's also bent over, open, and eager for that particular Black man. So I think that these are all entangled, which again is an ecological phrase, right? Like it's this invitation to become entangled, to blur the boundaries, right? This idea that we are sovereign beings is also the white man's myth, right? And we're only we only need to have a conversation about consent and boundaries and sovereignty within a world built upon the violation of them, right? And it's to kind of make this more concrete. It's like the diversity, equality, and inclusion movement. I'm so sorry. I don't want to disrespect actual movements. But one of the things that drives me so crazy is, like, have you ever thought that talking about the worth of Black people to your business in pounds and pence is very slave blocky? Like, what are you doing? Right? Like, why would you say that? And why would you elect to be part of that system? Now, there's no ethical consumption to capitalism, blah, blah, blah. But that's another way of saying it, that I think for Black bodies, certainly, brown bodies for sure, women, absolutely, this idea that our bodies might ever have belonged to us in the first place is kind of non-existent, right? Everything is a move to actually reclaim what was never ours, right? I'm thinking about all the tattoos I have. I felt so silly admitting this to my friend, but I went through this. I wanted my, speaking, Connor, your career in porn, my, I wanted to look like an OnlyFans porn star. And I went to my tattoo artist and said, I want to look like a porn star. But I was marking my body with things that meant something to me as a way of reclaiming it, as a way of saying, this is mine. And I thought, to that point around Black bodies and slave blocks and what am I worth to you? I was like, well, I wonder if marking my body devalues it in some way. And I wonder if me devaluing my body helps me reclaim it in some way. Spoiler alert, it doesn't, and it doesn't devalue my body. But it's the whole thing was built on a fallacy, right? But I do think that, I think that you're not holding us back in the economy. I think that the economy is, I think it's a thing we have to move away from. I don't know that in the world I'm imagining in my head that there's an economy as we've inherited it, as has been defined for us so far. I mean, and the last thing I'll say, because I don't want to hog up all the airtime, but I was speaking to my friend Candice de Meza. She trained under the late Malidoma Somé of the Dagara people, and I was like kind of really frothing at the mouth about enchantment and this idea that Malcolm Guite says humans are not empowered to re-enchant the world because nature can't be disenchanted. Humans have to undisenchant ourselves. And so I was like, well, what does this mean within West African cosmologies in which they've never been separated from the ecologies they belong to? They don't need to be re-enchanted because they belong still, right? And I think this economy conversation might also be part of that entanglement, that we need an economy to understand relationships in the West that have only ever been transactional.
I'm sorry, I just have to jump in, but I was really excited to say something about Malidoma Somé. I took a workshop with him, and we were gonna go gather rocks from outside, and this woman said, "Oh, well, like if we pick up a rock and there's like a salamander under there, should we like say sorry to it because it's home?" And he kind of looked at her and he was like, "Huh?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I kind of see as someone from the United States why you would think you had to apologize to it. But no, I mean, I guess someone from a Dagara community might just eat it or something. We just wouldn't even like think of it." And that idea of the separation, how we create these separations, how we create what anthropologists sometimes call the suffering slot. We put things in states of constant suffering and separation because they're convenient to a certain way of thinking, all this sort of stuff. I mean, that's all there. For me, just to be clear, for the episodes I'm talking about, when I separate out culture, economy, and politics, it's to pull them, to disentangle them, to strengthen them so they can meet again in a harmony, not because they are somehow artificially separated already, but rather they need our help to meet each other, because we're doing them all the time and they're doing us. And so
That
the
makes sense.
economy
I
for me,
appreciate that clarification.
yeah, yeah. And just like the economy for me is like we're all connected in spirit. So what does that mean? We're all connected here in a way, but we're all connected in spirit. And what does that mean for in terms of that sphere of the economy when we want to strengthen it?
Also, that just made me think of I watched this stupid ass show called Naked and Afraid, where I don't know if you know, there's like a cis man and a cis woman most of the time. They've had a trans woman on once, like stranded somewhere where they have to survive naked. And I fucking hate it when the like white guy like goes to kill something. Because he always feels very proud of himself when he can hunt and kill something. And he thanks the animal for its life, right? And like this is obviously someone who doesn't have that kind of spiritual practice or whatever. I'm like, shut the fuck up! Like you don't care about eating this meat, like whatever. Anyway, I'm curious because so you brought up like West African relationship to the land that doesn't need to be like unlearned from Western civilization. And I always go back to this point that Cleve and Ali makes in his book No Spiritual Surrender. And he talks about being part of this land defense project of the San Francisco Peaks, which is near Flagstaff in Arizona, where they were trying to develop the land into a ski resort. And and like it's like adding insult to injury, piping in sewage to make the snow for the for the ski resort. And they tried details all the different ways that they tried to defend the land from this development. But the thing that really sticks out to me is that when they took it into the courts to try to defend it on like right to religion from the Constitution, the court was unable to understand their spiritual relationship to that land as religion in terms of the way that Christianity, I think in particular, defines religion. And then he leans into this idea of like of the unknowable and unknowing, and that there is an impossibility for Western enlightenment-based philosophy to understand or know what the indigenous relationship through spirituality is. And while I mean, we can't just like say like that can resist in itself all of the violence that is wrought upon the land or the people, but something I've been really trying to think through in my writing and this book that I'm coming out is like how we live in multiple worlds at once. And so there's like multiple layers. And I think this is sort of something you're exploring too, Connor, in these episodes that we're talking about. But like, so there is a world that can't be touched, right, by the development of Western capitalist destruction. Um, it is touched often, but that still exists in some way. And then okay, so then I'm gonna bring this back to that beautiful Essex Hemphill poem because I'm thinking like one of the main philosophical, I don't know, practical understandings of life for me is through these ideas of like moments of being is what Virginia Woolf calls them, or like spots of time is sort of what Wordsworth calls them. But I pull it from Walter Pater, the queer Oxford Don, who is one of Oscar Wilde's teachers, and he talks about like how we are given a limited amount of moments in life, and to burn hard with this gem-like flame is like to have to like maintain that ecstasy is to have success in life. And he goes into the molecules of us weaving in and weaving out too. And so I always think about these moments that to a certain extent need the in-between moments to be able to explode like that. And I heard that poem and I think the word moment was used in it, or maybe you used it to describe it. So there's like a moment that's captured in that poem that you can understand on all these levels, right? Like, and in relation to other parts of the poem where like the white man's desire for the black man comes in, but this is a moment between two black men in a bed that we can't three, sorry. Oh, because there's two in the bed and he's narrating. Okay, yeah. That we could understand from like, you know, a kind of critical racial analysis perspective, but like to take the Joyce thing, like who is he when he's at home, right? Like who, like there's all of these different layers, and when we take the perspective of property, which is like our body as property, which is whiteness, is defined through whiteness and as whiteness, and everyone else is kind of negatively defined through that. Like that is not an experience all the time saturating everyone's moment, right? And so these three black men in bed, like are not understanding themselves fully through like the blackness that is defined against whiteness. I think this is sort of where I'm going. Josh, you jump in.
Well, sorry, I'm getting really activated in the best way because the moonlight spilling through tall windows, lingering over them, curious about their peace. This is a moonlight that doesn't understand property law or whatever constructs of the white, cis, heteropatriarchal imagination we're living within, right? And this idea that is so enchanting to me, that is so, because it's so true and because it's so real and because it is actually happening all the time. It's these what did you call it? Burn hard, gem hot flame moments. I might have
Burn
just really
hard with a
butchered that.
gem-like flame. Sorry.
Oh,
Which my friend
like
also said sounded like an STI. But anyway.
no, they won't ruin that for us. But but that the moonlight spilling in those tall windows over those black bodies is that gem, right? Is that gem light flame? It's beautiful, and so I think again, this is for me an example of the black imaginative at work, right? Not only like showing us what's at stake, right? In that temporal moment, in this temporal moment, but kind of beyond time eternally, what's at stake is this kind of this beautiful human entangled experience. Um, but also shows us like what we can work towards, right? That if we're able to have these moments behind closed doors with the moonlight, or maybe even out in the woods with all the bugs, that means that we can have it at scale too, right? So maybe the imaginative isn't something beyond the imagination, but is actually a kind of a transmutation of the private to the public.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually that is how I define, in some ways, how I define culture in the episode we've been talking about in that series, where you know the the cultural, which I define, it's not necessarily a definition I ask people to agree with, but it's the framing for me in the way to speak about it, which is an individual pursuit in the sense that the and it takes all different forms, but we think of it as something more than individual because it springs into the public, it springs into relationship as we sort of we enter into this spiritual state and we try to bring back spiritual substance to share with others, and that's where it starts to become public in this way. And yes, I was thinking about how when we enter into spiritual state and we try to come back with spiritual substance, maybe it's when something profound is like occurring in our imagination and we want, or the erotic life, the sexual life, we want to do something artistic or whatever, and we try to bring that into the world through conversation, art, whatever it is. A lot of times what happens is the lesson from the fairy tale, which is we enter into the world of the fairies and it's extremely profound and the fairies give us gold. But when we make our way back into the world, we find that we have breadcrumbs in our pockets, and that the sort of passageway into the public does something that can't just be sustained by entering into that spiritual state and bringing it forward. And that that work, as we have sex more, make art more, have more conversations, sit in meditation, sit in contemplation, all that kind of stuff. That practice allows us to bring more and more of that spiritual substance from that spiritual state into the world.
There's a scene, I'm going back to Virginia Woolf and Mrs. Dalloway, where she's remembering throwing, I think, bread to geese at the lake and like remembering the moment of the lake. And then she's having this thought of her parents and the ability to like give to her parents. She's like, this is life. This is my life. This is what I've made of it. And like show them everything all at once. And I always like start weeping when I read that. Because I think like that there's like the breadcrumbs, which is like what you actually try to hand off to someone, and then the idea of this like bursting of the seams idea of life that's like everything that encompasses everything, and you can't communicate that, you can't give it to someone to hold and understand in its fullness. And but it's also the drive, I think it's like it's part of the like the drive to connect with people is to find like ways to splinter pieces of that off into a shit like a like real genuine connections.
I'm currently reading a lot of fairy tales because I'm interviewing a fairy tale scholar in a few weeks, namely around what fairy tales tell us about social justice and the kind of cultural hegemony of, the movies and what have you. And I was reading Mary Louise von Franz, Jung's favorite pupil. She has a book about archetypes as they show up in fairy tales. And I learned that in most cultures around the world, the hero dies or goes off with the gods. Like the hero can't stay in the village because the hero is temporal, uh, not an identity, right? It's something that springs up when you need it, but must go away again. And the hero cannot live among the humans. And so, this idea that fairy tales as a technology are a way of transmitting information, often clandestine communication, maps, routes, what have you, I think is a really interesting segue. But I just wanted to offer that um, even the fairy tales we tell have some sort of connection to the status quo, for better or worse, right? Either we're using fairy tales as a technology of subterfuge and clandestine communications, or we're using them kind of hegemonically, if that's even a word, to kind of impose our worldview on others. So even the stories we tell have to be recombinated. And it might be that we kind of start blending all these different stories together to create a new one, but maybe this is part of what Connor and Shuli, you're both calling us towards is like a potluck imagination about what the future might be. Like, how can we, um, what warnings as well as blessings can we bring from each of our perspectives and cultures and inheritances that might make for something that we haven't seen before? Oh, don't get me started because I just saw Wangechi Mutu in my head, and I'll start frothing at the mouth.
There's like potluck and potlatch, which is the waste and expenditure thing that Bataille pulls up from some archaeology, but anthropology. But I just want to say because fucking I don't know why fucking Levinas is coming to my head, but he talks about how the Odyssey is a story of going out and returning, right? And for him, that is not the model of ethics. The model is going out and never return, not being able to return, because if you can, you return to the same. So you don't have an actual relationship to the other. So I don't. Then maybe that's similar to the kind of thing that you were
No,
talking
I
about.
love that. Yeah, how do we leave home? Yeah.
It's so in Ulysses by Joyce, which famously traces some of the Odyssey, but does so much more than that. I think that's actually kind of an overemphasized point about its structure. But one of the most profound things about Ulysses is that Joyce is presenting with the way that consciousness breathes in and out of the narrative and people's everyday lives, and how you can't always tell when someone's thinking something or when it's an object that's being seen or when something's happening. It's all just flowing in and out of itself. So in that sense, it's actually one of the most realistic things ever written. Um, that he decided to show that these journeys or this being a hero or whatever is contained in each day of each life of each person in each place. And that therefore, if we really decided to take a look at ourselves in this period of time, and maybe it's not true for every area, but in this time, that we see that we actually have reached this kind of line of flight, to use the Guattari term, that we've left that cycle, that we've left that just total like circular revolution is actually another term for it, revolutionary pattern, and that we might be moving beyond that. And that if we just look at our own lives, we can see that this is true, that there's something even more profound happening than is happening in the Odyssey. And what I also think is, in terms of what you were saying with the fairy tales and how even they must be sort of reapproached, um, you know, everything in the world, I think a lot of us it's like everything's changing. And no, in some ways that's true. In some ways that maybe is not true. But that sense of so much is changing. But what's coming along with that, of course, is the changing of values that a lot of people, maybe not us, but a lot of people thought were always be in place. And that includes human rights. That includes a sense of compassion for your neighbor. That includes, and it's not that those things will necessarily go away, but that they have to be rearticulated in a way that does not allow them to cede ground to the things that are trying to seize them and pull them away now. That actually they deserve everything that we thought was good also deserves rearticulation, deserves renewal, deserves revitalization. It's not just the bad shit. It's also the things that are good and exciting to us that deserve that new attention. And so that's what it is about this kind of renewing the world or a new spiritual society or whatever way we want to talk about it. It's not just the bad stuff,
No, I love this because the goodness, one of the things that Marquise Bay emphasizes in Black trans feminism is that everything we know, good and bad, is a result of us living under duress. And so none of it can come with us, right? Not the labels, not the Blackness, not the queerness, none of it can come. And I love that because it's so provocative. And I said to Marquise in conversation, I have spent so much time like coming into like a full-throated, pun intended, Blackness, right? Queer Blackness, belligerent Blackness. That this, I'm one of the Blacks that bites. That it's taken me a while to get to this place where it's I'm owning all of it, and the idea that I might have to let any of it go terrifies me. But it's within that terror, right, that the potential lives. That the risk. Like that's the risk it takes to bloom, to quote someone else, right? And so I love that the good has to be challenged. Like, what does altruism mean in a world in which we haven't had to be altruistic? Right? Like, what does goodness mean in a world in which the vampiric hasn't been allowed to take hold and plug us all into its I don't know, machines, if you will. I'm mixing metaphors, but so I love this invitation. What's good in a world that hasn't needed it?
Yeah, I'm always hammering this idea that like we don't want to bring any of the shit with us into another world. But yeah, like I'm like, you're gonna have to give up transness, but and gayness and like whatever. But then, this is making me reread the Ockengam line that I quote a lot. Is like we don't choose to be homosexuals, but we choose to remain homosexuals, and if we read that then from his perspective of pessimism as the gay liberation movement failed, choosing to remain homosexual when he calls it like the state homosexual is a choice. It's a political choice. It's not a liberatory choice at all. Yeah, that inflection was actually helpful to me. But I want to ask you this question, Josh, because so I also started thinking about Joy James's idea of the captive maternal, where she talks about like kind of the care structure, like maternal care structure that Black people have had to build in all of these situations under duress. Like she uses the example, I think, of Attica, like in prison, and incarcerated people do this. And like, it's not the world that we want to build, right? It's a world of survival. And so she talks about basically the kind of the womb of the whatever, the new world, and how Black people figure within that. And I'm wondering, because I've talked with with students before too, about how you have to, like, if we imagine a world that's liberated or whatever, we have to give up all these things. And I remember a Black student of mine challenging me, being like, "But I don't want to give up like Black culture, right?" And we could say similar things for like gay culture. Like, this is Alkingham's like, we gave up the criminality of gay culture, and that has been a huge loss. And like, Black culture is a positive creation within a situation of violence and pain. Also, it's a thing that has been completely like sucked into white property and capitalism. It's basically the whole structure of the whole culture of the world at this point. So I don't know. What do you think about that kind of thing? Because it's like it's also, yeah, it's tools of survival, right? But also this like beautiful efflorescence of life under the guise of, I mean, under the thumb of death.
I think what Black culture shows us is the vitality of the human experience, that a peoples as enslaved and degraded and killed, murdered, have and choose repeatedly over and over and over and over and over again to be vitalizing and luminous and to sing, to make art, to challenge our understanding of self and other and relationships, to choose radical attention and radical love. That's a human impulse. And if other communities have forgotten that they have that within them, I think that's the mirror that Blackness puts up. And, I mean, I think you know this, Julie, and Connor, if you don't, welcome. But, I'm in this kind of recurring practice of sobriety, and I'm struggling with the 12-step program. I think it's I don't necessarily agree that I should wake up every day and call myself an addict. I think it's kind of one of those reinforcing things that I don't really agree with. Um, but one of the things a sponsor said to me was that I think about often was, everything about you up until this point has not kept you sober. There's no poem, there's no belief, there is nothing you've done so far has stopped you from going out and getting absolutely wrecked when you don't want to. And so you can't hold an attachment to any of that. And I find that really challenging. But if I think about it, one, he's right. If all the things that I love haven't prevented me from, you know, engaging in really self-destructive behavior, what's my allegiance to it? If there is some essence of Joshua or Blackness or of Shuli or of Connor, it will survive the apocalypse, right? It will survive the end of the world. It will survive. And, there's this, I think you'll probably know more about this than I do, but there's this post-apocalypse. I don't know if you've heard of this. It's like art that imagines the world like 2 generations after the end of the world. And in one of these essays I was reading about the post-apocalypse, they reference Nina Simone in this film about a post-apocalyptic Tokyo, and she still retains her radical signature. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. Like, how does Nina Simone stay Nina Simone 2 generations after the apocalypse? Like, she couldn't exist. So there's also something about a Blackness that coheres in the white imagination beyond the end of the world times 2 that I think that we have to also hold in mind as well, is that the destruction of Blackness is actually mission fucking critical to us reimagining a new world.
Wow. I mean, this is, first of all, such a potent question, Julie, and then this answer. I mean, for me, who experiences the reality of reincarnation, yes, there is something that is with us even after we lose all conditions that are familiar to us, which is death. The most meaningful thing that happens is the loss of all conditions as we enter into the realm of being that is in between this life and the next, and then we incarnate again. And with us is something that evinces the new life, that expresses the new life. And, a simplistic way of thinking of reincarnation is that, if you were a doctor in this life, maybe you'll like medicine in the next. But if you think about it, if I cut off your left hand in this life, you would have a very different life in this life. So if I remove the entirety of your physical conditions and bring you into new life again, you're going to have a very different kind of person, a very different kind of being. So it's not the personality, but still there is something there. So Rudolf Steiner's way of describing this would be like if you were an architect and you spent your whole life devoted to architecture, that desire will show up in your form as a beautiful ear. The canals of your ear will be beautiful, right? And I think like this idea of what we desire, it does live on, but it takes form. Or it takes a different kind of avenue, a different kind of route. And especially the desires that we play with and resolve and live with and, have this full experience of. The ones that are sort of still going, and I'm not saying that that's bad, they get to do something else in the next incarnation. So when you talk about this, I don't want to lose this. Well, you won't, but you will be it in a way. You'll be it in a new way. And I also think, I'm thinking about this this thing in time where the the idea of the Bulgarian spiritual teacher Peter Dunov, also known as Binsa Duono, and he said, even within the least form, an angel is hidden, who after thousands and millions of years will transform this shape and reveal to it the knowledge that it carries within itself. And when I experience those words, I think everything demands that engagement with the angels or the angel or the constitutive forces, whatever you want to call them, that reveals something that is hidden within, even the things that are wise, even the things that are already brilliant and beautiful. Yes, I do lose form, and that's because we die, and the truth of death is the meaningful event that removes the conditions that we know.
So I have a question for both of you. I had a conversation with Ajamu. For those who don't know who Ajamu is, he is a queer Black British fine arts photographer and archivist, and was connected to Essex Hemphill and them, and wrote to me Fanny Coyote here in the UK, and we had this conversation about the archive as a pleasureful thing, something to be touched, interacted with, exchanged with, and that it lives, right? And Ajamu says this all comes down to how do you care for what you say you love? So my question to both of you is, how have you learned to care for what you say you love?
uh, um, I'm like immediately I'm like stumped.
You guys just got busy being blacked.
Well, I have an answer in a way, which is, I'll turn to Brave Buffalo. I don't know where this quote comes from, and I believe the quote is true. And it's Brave Buffalo said, "I've noticed in my life that all men have a liking for some special animal, tree, plant, or spot of earth. If men would pay more attention to these preferences and seek what is best to do in order to make themselves worthy of that toward which they are attracted, they might have dreams which would purify their lives. Let a man decide upon his favorite animal and make a study of it, learning its innocent ways. Let him learn to understand its sounds and motions. The animals want to communicate with man, but Wakataka does not intend that they shall do so directly. Man must do the greater part in securing an understanding." So when I think about caring for what I love, it is the act of making myself worthy of that towards which I am attracted. That there is something in me that is willing is wanting to open more and more and more to the experience and the presence of the gift of love, which is given to me through that attraction, desire, and draw. And again, esoterically, we'd almost say this is the opening of the chakras, or the lotus flowers opening, within our sacred anatomy. But beyond that, even just to say that this rose, which never ceases to open, can open more and more and more. And that's what I try to do, care for what I love. And then I also try to do that with what I don't love. So I can see how it's trying to love me. But that's a different task, and maybe not answering your question, but that would be the first thing I think of. There's probably other things, but that would be the first.
I think so. I was like, my first reaction was like, oh my God, I don't do anything. And what do I love? It's just probably telling about how I relate to myself. But I mean, this is the stuff that I've been exploring in my writing, and I don't know that I do it, but it's an aspiration. One of the things that I think is super important in relationship to loving other people and yourself is learning to let off the hook, letting off the hook for so many different things, right? For like the daily infractions that you, I don't know if infractions are the ways that you hurt people unintentionally, right? And taking their hurt seriously, letting them off the hook for the feeling that you don't have to take responsibility for, letting yourself off the hook, letting myself off the hook also, like, for me, means in relationship to like whatever work or the ways that I think I should be caring for myself. I think Josh, you and I talked about this too before once, about like the things that you feel like you're supposed to do as a way to care for yourself, right? That, and I think you were talking about this also in relationship to like the aims of self-destruction, or like the attachments to self-destruction. You can get really stuck in thinking there's a right way to do things, and that will fuck you up. And then I think there's like this other letting off the hook that I'm trying to understand, um, because like, the three of us are all people who want to see a great transformation in the world, and part of our expressions. Now I'm speaking for you, but like my part of my expression of love is the love of the idea that we can like reform the world through care and together. But I want to let myself and my people and everyone off the hook from the responsibility of doing that, because wearing that as a responsibility is one of the ways that impedes it, right? Because it makes us single-minded. It tries to bring everyone into agreement, perhaps. It says there's a right way and a wrong way to do things. It projects things. And ultimately, for me, um, the task is to hold multiple worlds and realities all together at once, which I think also goes to something that you were talking earlier about, Connor. Uh, that they can glance together, but against each other, but they have to coexist. I don't like saying coexist because of that fucking bumper sticker, but yeah. So letting ourselves off the hook from changing everything. These are all forms of love. I hope this sound. I'm like, is this? I don't know. Is this even?
It totally answers the question. Absolutely. You both did answer that question beautifully. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question, and then maybe Shuli, you have a question too that you can formulate. But I love that you asked us both a question, and I want to ask you both a question and see how you answer. And of course, Joshua, if you want to answer your own question, you can. I don't know if you want to, or if I should just ask mine, and then we'll.
Good point.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll answer. Because it connects to what both of you said. I found that really helpful because I often don't know how to answer that question myself, which is why I ask other people. It's like when I ask, "How's your heart?" I'm busy being black. It's because I'm like looking for language to describe my own. So when you brought up that quote about every human has an animal, plant, or plot of land that they care about, I thought of white lilies. And I have this kind of rabid enchantment with white lilies. I love the smell of them. I love their shock of white. I love that they are defiantly white in a world that is so dirty. And I thought, as you were talking, Connor, oh, what kind of, how could I till the soil so that more white lilies will bloom, right? So what do I need to do to make sure that the conditions are right for more white lilies to bloom? But also, I care for what I love by doing what white lilies do to me. They enchant me, and I enchant people. Like, that's my mission in life, is to enchant you to liveliness, to make you feel sparkly and curious. So I think I care for what I love through enchantment, which is an act of self-love, right? Surely I have to create the conditions for myself to be enchanted, and that means I cannot be hard on myself, and the self-critic has to go, and the perfectionist has to go, and I need to eat well and sleep and not self-destruct. So again, it's how am I tilling my own soil? Maybe another question for you to keep aspiring to.
I'm going to ask a question. Let's see if I can formulate it. So when Julie and Dean Spade were on my show last week, came prepared with questions, but as we've been busy being blacked, as you put it, Joshua, now I'm thinking I want to against everyone, both of you. And then you can break up theory as Julie. But for me, as you were talking before about sobriety and recovery and all, that I was thinking about how when John Holloway was on my show, and his books Crack Capitalism and Changing the World Without Seizing Power, I think, is another one. And anyway, he has such a beautiful formulation of what to do. And he's definitely steeped in Marxism, and has done work with the Zapatistas and so forth. And I felt really timid asking him this question at the end, but I knew I had to ask him. And he didn't have the greatest answer, but he kind of laughed, and we had a good time with it, which was like, well, what if like this whole thing about fighting capitalism is wrong because capitalism is a poorly formulated but like pathology, in the same way that like talking about all the solutions here and the diagnosis or the naming that you're talking about, neither of them solve the problem exactly. Like, you can have the suspicion and also know that the solutions wouldn't have been correct either, and you need this intervention or whatever. So it's all this like kind of trying to figure out how to articulate and speak about something so that it is rendered curative. So it becomes helpful. So it becomes medicine and becomes nourishing. Extend this into a question is something like, I want to imagine what it would mean to try to work for this transformation of the world without the set of capitalism and communism. But I don't even mean what would it mean to go beyond communism and Marxism as a solution to capitalism. But what if we again had to reformulate, as we were talking about with fairy tales, reformulate all of it, including the enemy, the so-called enemy or the so-called problem? Where would that lead us? What would remain for you in how to think, feel, and act going forward, looking at the world, remaking it, renewing it, revitalizing it? And I'm not saying you have to in your lives, but just as a response to the question, maybe.
I see 5 people in my head. I'm writing a poem. My friend number 1 is cooking. Friend number 2 is hanging laundry in a garden. The wind is blowing. And there are 2 kids playing out front. And it is verdant and blue and warm. And the question I have is, what does each of us need? What does each of us need? What do I need to write my poem? What do the kids need to frolic outside, free from just frolic outside? What does what are the kind of material things my friend who did the laundry this week needs? And what about cooking, And that vision in my head doesn't cause me any great deal of anxiety. I'm not worried about money. That feels like a very generative vision in my mind. And I think 5 feels important because it's more than the 2.2 nuclear unit. Um, it's multi-generational and it's manageable, right? It's something I can do as Joshua. I can check on the 4 people around me and make sure that we each have what we need. And yeah, that to me opens up the possibilities of a garden and neighbors and this kind of very small hyperlocal approach to living, which is probably not innovative, but it is radical, right? It returns to some sort of root without the nostalgia, right? There, there was a thread going around the other day, and it was like, well, if trad wife is so healthy and attractive, why did you all ever need slaves? Like, let's be fucking real. Um, so it doesn't contain any nostalgia. I have never lived a soft life. I have never lived the slowness that people wax lyrical about on social media. Like, I don't think we're supposed to move this fast. No fucking shit, Sherlock. When did we ever not? And if there was a time when people didn't have to move so fast, someone else definitely did, right? It's never been free. So I want to be clear as well that I think that when I envision um, the future, it's very small. It's Yeah, it's very manageable to me, and I think the smallness means I don't need theory, I need relationships.
That was really beautiful. And I mean, yeah, that really helps me in a lot of ways to think about where desire leads us. Capitalism is a story we tell to ourselves about the way the world is working. And like the way I understand Marx, for example, I'm not a Marxist, but like he told a really good story about the way capitalism works that's really useful for understanding aspects of it. And he has, an idea of where that could lead. It's one tool, but certainly we're stuck in telling this story. And I think that we tell the story, particularly right now, in such a way that we're doomed to failure because we can't really see the material conditions in front of us and how we can act. We venerate and worship militants of the past. We measure ourselves against them and what they were doing. We can't accept that like revolutions have just led to more death and pain and enslavement. Um, and so yeah, so I'm putting a we in terms of the people who are trying to like fight capitalism, obviously. So that question is really important to me actually, because like w- this I always go back to the June Jordan thing, right? It's like we can't only think about the monsters on our back, and when we get the monster of our back, we all might want to go running in different directions. This is like my favorite idea ever, I think. And she's a poet, right? She's like going back to what you keep bringing us back to, Joshua. Um, so yeah, like we don't like. What if we told? What if we didn't have a monster constantly haunting us or at our periphery? And I don't want to say like tell another story because I don't. I have suspicion of stories being the solution to things. Instead, I was just remembering I worked with a psychic who ended up like firing me, but he hated anarchism. He hated my attachment to anarchism because he thought it was just negative. And I couldn't explain to him that I thought of it as a positive thing. And it didn't really matter in the end. But the problem with a narrative, as long as the way that it's practiced, I guess, like within a Western kind of culture, is that it ends up congealing something, right? It makes a character, makes an identity, makes a plot, makes it gives you a framework in which to make meaning. You can make infinite amounts of meaning from it, but the key, I think, in life, and I think that I can see this in the image that you were painting for us, Joshua, is that the ability to change and let everything change and accept that change and love that change in yourself and others without trying to freeze it in time in a narrative, or even to explain it and understand it, whether through a theory or like through psychoanalysis. um I mean, that would be, I think, a key. That would be a way to live this life that is not predetermined by the structures that we continually and endlessly analyze as the problem. And one more thing, just thinking like in your picture of the friends in the house, and you started saying freedom, Joshua, and then you took that away. And I think that's important because I don't imagine freedom like, because freedom is in relationship, right? People are like, there's freedom to and there's freedom from. But we don't really want either one of those because that's a negative relationship to unfreedom. And we can talk about how the idea of freedom as we understand it was wrought in slavery, being like these people are free and these people aren't free. Um, so it's not a freedom, maybe an openness, you know. And for me, it's a very physical feeling too, that you would have to feel this like in your bones and muscles and body and expansion. But yeah, that's where I went with your question, Connor. Did you want to give your ideas, Connor?
I mean, the episodes I did were kind of an attempt to answer this question on my own, but just in terms of capitalism, communism, in terms of sort of political struggles which occur in sets, that become codependent. In a way, I would say that for me, utopia is always the answer in a sense. And I don't mean utopia of like striving for a perfect state. I definitely, obviously don't mean that. I wouldn't dare bring that to this company. But what I mean instead is an orienting principle where you are in touch with what is already there, is already beautiful, and beginning to breathe with it, to find its rhythms and live with it. The way that when you love somebody, or when it's your partner, your parent and your child, and you lie in bed with them, you sometimes begin to match your breath with their breath as you fall asleep, so you can be in that rhythm with them, and it lulls you into dreaming with them. And that can happen once you attain liberation. But liberation is not enough. We liberate ourselves to heal, and the healing is great, but if you keep healing yourself, you're going to get sick again. So it's like if you eat raw food to heal from something, and then you continue to eat raw food, you might get the sickness that comes from that, or whatever medicines we take. So we liberate ourselves, we feel that state, like you were talking about with June Jordan, that great uh, getting the monster off our back, and then we get into new rhythms. And getting into new rhythms mean that we have a different view of time. And getting into a new view of time means that we start to engage with the world completely differently. And that opens up pathways to what is timeless, or lives in different times, or lives in different registers, these different layers. I think, to me, people are doing that all the time anyway. It happens when we fuck. It happens when we meditate. It happens when we bake something. It happens when it happens when you have real conversation with people, or when you listen. And so it's not to say that that's enough, quote unquote. And I think we all have that struggle. Well, maybe the story is not enough. Maybe envisioning this, it's radical, but what if it's not, enough? It's like we have this idea of what's enough and what's not enough. And yet we are in touch with what is true. I mean, we're in touch with the truth in that case. It was like when we were in, lockdown situations, and people used to say like, it's okay to do nothing. It's okay to do nothing. No, no, no. this is something. The work that you were doing before was nothing. Like the job very often was nothing. This is something. This is rich. This is full. And now that you're touching it, it seems like it's the inverse of the truth, but it's actually the truth. And so I think the more that we do that, it does enrich our experience, and tells us what to bring back to the political realm. It's not a full answer, but that's why I did 4 episodes and not just one.
I love that. I mean, Oscar Wilde has the same kind of definition of utopia. It's like the place that you sail to, and once you get there, you start sailing to the next next place. Right? It's not a place you land and leave. And that enough thing is exactly the same. Like I'm thinking about this in my book. Well, Winnicott, the psychoanalyst, talks about the good enough mother, right? Like it's just enough. You do just enough, right? And you want just enough in order for all the other things to happen that welcome in all the other possibilities. Okay, so I'm going to get to my question. Oh, Josh, you want to jump in? In my book, I have this word antidote, which I don't even know if that came from me or the publishers or whatever. But as I was writing a prelude to it, I was like trying to reflect on what antidote means. And I was thinking about, is it a cure? Thinking about the drug as a poison and a cure. And then I was like, what do I like in drugs? And I realized that I like to see things. I like the altered perception. I like to see things askance, right? Ockingham or Guattari would talk about transversal, right? Like you approach it transversely. And as we were talking, I was like, oh, actually, that's like a great pleasure for me is to approach things askance. It's where I find joy. It's not just like an analysis, but even what I like psychoanalysis is because it allows me to see, like, approach the world askance, right? Or I love, now I'm answering my question. Um, so I wanted to, and I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, but like, if you vibe with the idea of approaching the world from these different angles as a way to open things up, I'm curious. Well, first, I'm curious what you think of that idea, and also if there are ways that you find yourself able to do that opens something for you.
I fucking love this question. I really love you saying like, what is it I like about drugs? Because it's an incredible way to get into the desire, right? Mine is fluidity. There is a particular disinhibition I pursue that I find incredibly difficult to give myself while I'm sober, and um it's almost like a complete dissolution of form, right? That and it reinvests me with kind of like a libidinal arabesque desire to move through the world, right? More elegantly, more flamboyantly, more I want to dance, right? And so yeah, that's what I think about when I think about antidotes is what enables me to dance, what enables my hips to loosen, what enables me to feel pain free, right? That there is no cost to the disinhibition to move through the world, to engaging with the earthly and the embodied. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Um, I think I understand the question. I'm not sure I fully understand it, so I'll answer what I heard.
Just misunderstand me, please.
Okay. You're vast and contain multitudes. The greatest gift of my life has been spiritual development. And I don't mean self-development, although self-development is also important. But separately, spiritual development where I begin to change as a result of inner practices that free me from a certain level that I've been living on. And of course, these come with altered states. I actually alter my state. I alter my being. And I used to describe it as becoming psychotic. And I was referring really to the Lacanian view of psychosis. But maybe Deleuze and Guattari and schizoanalysis might also be good for people that aren't, want to get into the esoteric idea, which is I'm not romanticizing psychosis, but I'm saying that there's an aspect of psychosis which allows you to defy or leave behind or overcome and go beyond the quote unquote name of the Father, the things that have demanded that I carry on my back. Like the woman in Labyrinth who has all the garbage on her back that can only turn more people into people like her who carry the garbage and bric-a-brac on their back all the time. If you haven't seen Labyrinth, sorry, it's a great movie. But I know as I do this development that my capacities deepen. My capacity for everything deepens. And as I do that, the world suddenly opens up again. And every time it's like, that saying, God never gives me a challenge that I can't handle. It's the opposite in spiritual development. God only gives me challenges that I can't handle. And what I then have to do is give up to God. I have to surrender to God. And as I surrender, then I'm destroyed in a way. And I can now begin again and begin again. And it's not linear. There's no linear progress of spiritual development. It's different for each individual. So some people might be really far ahead of me in some capacities. If you want to talk about ahead, that's not even right a thing. And some might be other, and I might get something really quickly that it might take someone a lifetime to get. But for me, it's the constant altering of state. So what I might experience as altered states might be someone else's normal. And there is no baseline of consciousness that is normal, right? There's just none. So like doing drugs to alter consciousness, well, your dreams are different. The sexual state is different. Meditation is different. Eating is different. Conversation is different. Walking down the street, thinking, blah, 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 doing mathematics. And so for me, it's an engagement with the many states that are available to me. And it transforms the world utterly. You can no longer make propositions that are only about material conditions. It doesn't mean you leave them behind, because that's also an error. But you engage with them differently and as part of something, as a symbiotic element of reality. So that's my answer.
God only gives me challenges I can't handle. Just knocked me off my seat. Oh my God. This links to the fairy tale, the hero. The hero cannot stay with the tribe because the hero does inhuman tasks. And to remain the hero is to remain inhuman among humans. And it's not that those two things. God only gives me challenge. God only gives me what I can't handle. Oh my God, why don't they teach us this stuff? That makes so much sense.
I want to add one piece to that, actually, since you're picking up on that. And then, Julie, I'd love to hear your answer to your own question. And I know we're wrapping things up here, too. But, Mona Al-Tahawi, the anarchist Muslim feminist, she says, if your community is ready for you, you're already too late. And so also the idea that you can't actually be in community with people when you are pushing forward. You're doing it for them, as you're doing it for yourself as well, but you're doing it for everyone. And as soon as you do that, like, it's normalized, and like you've got to go somewhere else. I'm not saying like and so just to bring the community piece in, that there's also this kind of like atonal dissonance, this thing that happens in community sometimes when we're pushing forward our own spiritual development, our own community development, and our own self-development, that makes us discordant with the very people we're working for. And we always have to be fighting for those who are fighting against us all the time, unfortunately. It's true.
Yeah. Dissonance is interesting because, that's something that comes up in my thinking and working, as the idea of like living in many worlds at once. And I also like take some from my friend Simon von Sarlos, who talks about dissonance trans dissonance, and my friend Jamie Heather Pelling, who writes about disassociation as like a way to live under fascism through transness. And just to say, like, I didn't necessarily, I wasn't trying to like celebrate drugs. I was just like, what do I like about it? And like, so like your answer, Joshua, of like the fluidity, like that's like part of the desire that totally makes sense. And then, um, Connor, I think you got to like the layering quality too. Because for me, if anarchism is worth anything, it's its ability to apprehend like all these different layers. And again, I don't care about the word. Like I throw away that word to get somewhere else. Um, when I like when I've tried to think about like a simple kind of joy in my life that in times where I've had been struggling and having a hard time, like I think about riding my bicycle um in the city, particularly at night. Um and I see myself, or like I see the world totally differently. I'm at a different height. I'm in a different speed. My shadow is like in the dark is like weird and long, and it's just like exhilarating to me. The wind, the like fluctuations of traffic, the relationships with other people, which can sometimes be angry, which is pretty city like. Because I'm like actually taking my life in my hands when I when I cycle around New York City. Um, but yeah, so and I think I was trying to relate that like this joy of cycling to an altered perception because it allows me to see things differently. And there's like a bad version of that, I guess, for me, like where I look above and I'm like looking at a diorama of like ants or whatever, humans as ants, just like walking in and out of boxes, you know? I'm like, that's all our life really is in this world, is like we go in and out of boxes. And sometimes I can laugh at that, and sometimes I'm like, this is really depressing. But yeah, for me, it's just really trying to hold these different layers together as mm, they can be conflicting realities, but they're all what make up reality. And uh, yeah, if your community is ready, then you're already too late. I think that really makes sense, right? Because again, we don't want to get stuck, and and yeah, when we get stuck, that's when power starts to cohere into one place. It's when, yeah, we become the thing that is expected of us and can't change. Anyway, that's sort of where I would take that.
The only thing I want to say here at the end is just to quote the psychoanalyst and scientist Wilhelm Reich, who said that civilization has not yet begun. And for me, this is really powerful because I don't need to mourn the loss of something that has not even arrived yet. Every time, Julie, I talk with you, and now Joshua talking with you, I like you can sense like the plenipotentiality, the wellspring, the utopia, the destiny, the many things that are available to us. And so I'm so thankful to talk with you both, and also like to have you engage with something that I've spent a lot of time on, and also like to meet you now, Joshua. So thank you so much. And I know we're going to hand it off to you to bring us through the end of this conversation.
So I thought about that Essex Hemphill poem, Vital Signs, and something one of you said made me think, maybe I want to be moonlight. Maybe I want to be the moonlight. Maybe I want to observe, and maybe I want to do less acting on the world and more kind of illuminating, maybe even a secondhand illumination, which made me think of Dancing in the Moonlight by Toploader. So I thought we could dance our way to the end of this conversation. Will you dance with me?
You've been listening to The Breakup Theory. Rate and follow us and tell your exes.